There we go. We're going live. You are live. Happy New Year. Happy New Year, everybody. Hey, Happy New Year. Anyone make any resolutions? That would be my first question. I'm not a big New Year's resolution person.
I don't think resolutions are a good idea.
No, but it's nice to have a time just to kind of reset and think about.
Sure, I think
What
it's
you
good
wanna
to maybe
do,
plan for like
plan.
themes of the year or something like that. But resolutions, I don't know. Don't say if you're gonna make it. You should make it whenever you feel like you should make it, not arbitrate it.
Do you have a plan for the year?
I don't
No?
know.
If a MacAdmin said, help, I need you to come up with some interesting plans for the year for me, what would you recommend?
I don't know.
What should a
Figure out
MacAdmin
MDMs.
look at this year to be successful?
MDM.
Windows.
Yeah, sure. Windows? No, we
Sure.
joke around about that, but I'm definitely a big fan of telling people that like they should expand their view on things. I like Windows. I think it's a useful thing. I mean, if you look at, I think there are several groups of people, myself included, and probably the people in this room that sort of live in this bubble of like, oh yeah, the Mac is like so much more popular than Windows. But in reality, you go look at the marketplace, and between hospitals and financial institutions, and like Windows still has a bulk of the market share. So, I mean, that provides some interesting opportunities for Apple.
Yeah.
Some Apple salesperson will become very financial institution says we're going all Mac. But as an admin, yeah, you can have more effect if you know both platforms really well. And I think we talk all the time about how useful it is to know Linux. So, and I've mentioned before, like I'm a huge fan of Raspberry Pis, and I just go run some Linux on those things.
Scripting or coding.
Scripting or coding, yeah, of course, that's always a good one.
People should look at Swift UI and Swift in general. WWDC's Performance UI. So there's probably going to be a version 2 of Swift UI.
Yeah, that's true.
It's good. It's
I just bought Daniel Steinberg's Swift UI book. I didn't start reading it yet, but I bought it, so I'm 10% of the way there. But yeah, I agree. That's a good thing to learn. Speaking of scripting, slight digression, but like, has anyone got into shortcuts on iOS?
yes.
I have fallen in love with shortcuts just to do like, and Android people like, yes, laugh because Android has been scriptable and automatable so much deeper than iOS for a very long time. And I remember way back
The ones I
using
found,
Android using Tasker.
I don't
right?
have any
So good.
home automation, so it got limits of like the things that I can do. But what I found the most useful for me was setting up a bunch of shortcuts when I plug in my CarPlay and like have things happen.
Yeah.
So I plug in my phone and it can figure out, depending on like my schedule and where I am, my location, whether it should suggest that I drive home or suggest that I drive to the gym or
Oh, that's
a few
cool.
of these things. So that's pretty fun.
I find shortcuts combined with scriptable and or Pythonista is really powerful. One of my, hello, a wild Eigerman appears. One of the things, I guess I have a few categories of things that I've been trying to do with shortcuts, but the one I probably use the most, anyone ever use outline.com? So Outline will kind of give you a reader view of an article, but it's also really useful for getting around paywalls. So if I see a link to like Wall Street Journal or Washington Post that I know is behind a paywall, it's just like long press, share, and I have it in the share sheet open with Outline, and I can go read the article. It's kind of handy. But one that I was thinking about the other day, I don't know if anyone uses the bedtime application. I really liked the bedtime application in iOS because you set your bedtime, you set your wake up time, and it records it in the health app automatically, like I slept this long. But of course, that's kind of a lie. It's like, okay, I set my bedtime at 11 and I'm waking up at 6 or 7, right? Whatever. Well, I really got to bed at 11:30 and I woke up a little early. And there's no way in bedtime to really like on the fly. So really, what I always wanted with bedtime was past a certain time, have some toggle where you get to say, hey, I'm going to bed. When you wake up, say, I'm waking up. Well, it turns out shortcuts can log data into Health app. So I created an I'm going to bed shortcut, which does a bunch of things, one of which logs the time that I'm going to bed. And then the next morning I have an I'm up, and that does a bunch of things, including reading that time, figuring out the duration, and logging that into Health. Like, stupid, but it's cool. It's like, it's useful for me.
Do you think it would be able to detect that? Did you like open your phone and unlock it
I
after
think there might be
around your bedtime?
Well,
around
maybe,
you probably
bedtime?
you probably have a better. It depends on how, if you use your phone until you fall asleep and then use your phone again when you wake up, sure. But if you put your phone away and then do something else and read a book or something, and then go to sleep an hour later, your phone thinks you've done nothing with it for an hour.
Right, and I think the right.
I guess it depends on how.
But the wake up at least is usually, I guess if you wake up early, that's the problem.
That's a problem. And so the right way to do this, I think, is with the Apple Watch, although I'm not I'm not a watch person. And in effect, when you're logging or the data that Apple Health can track actually tracks in bed, asleep, and one other thing. So technically, like, the watch should be able to, if you're wearing the watch, it knows when you get into bed and you're kind of motionless, but it also knows from your motions or heart rate or something that, okay, now you're actually asleep, which is probably 10 to 15-ish minutes later or whatever, right? But it's close enough for me. I don't care if I'm a few minutes off on the average across, a good span of time. But anyway, yeah, shortcuts. I've really, so speaking of scripting, yeah, I like shortcuts. And again, with Scriptable, which lets you run JavaScript, like, you can call that from shortcuts and vice versa. So it's really pretty powerful. Finally, right? Thankfully. Oh, the other cool thing is, unfortunately, Apple doesn't expose this to shortcuts, which is reading NFC tags. But the Home app can read NFC tags.
I've seen people do like a tag wall with like stuff.
I don't have a tag wall, but I went onto Amazon for like $7. I got like 15 NFC tags, and just like I stuck one. Actually, so I have this, bedside table next to, and it's, there's a storage area inside. I stuck one underneath, and I have a scene in Home that says, if you scan this NFC tag, shut off all the lights. So that's easy. I can get into bed without having to touch anything. Just boop. All my lights on the main floor are on Philips Hue, so they're all HomeKit compatible. So just as soon as I put it down over that end, like, I know not to. If I don't want to turn off the lights, don't put my phone in like this corner of the of the table. But if I put it in that corner of the table, get a little pop-up says running your automation.
Yeah, some people recommend stuff like NFC tags for like brushing your teeth timer and stuff. So you can like put an NFC tag in your bathroom, like, tap it, you're brushing your teeth, and like an alarm, 3 minutes.
Yeah, I guess
that's automating your life.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if that helps you, then great.
Maybe, but
great, but yeah. So we're talking about not New Year's resolutions, because we've determined that's not necessarily a good thing, but year-long plans. Now that we've reset, you have and what's a good thing for a Mac admin to think about this year? Yeah, it's a good one, right? So we said scripting, which has got us into shortcuts and such. We said Swift UI.
Yeah, Swift as a base. This is the year to consider Swift again if you aren't already on board.
Yeah.
Maybe the year to decide you're still not on board, but
Maybe like
Board from what?
yeah, Swift is a tough thing. I think it's if you are going to become an iOS developer and that's your goal, I would say, yeah, sure, go all in on Swift. But I still think in a lot of cases, Go is like much more useful in many cases. Like if you're writing server-side code or web developer, I think that's
It's also the year to get them to go. If you haven't gotten them to go. At this point, it's very mature.
yeah,
The
and
ecosystem, the tooling.
I think that's the secret. The secret is you don't have to pick just one, right? You can learn a little of both, right?
Yeah.
So, any suggestions for the Mac admins out there?
For things to do in 2020.
Yeah. What's something
I'm
that?
very interested in hardware this year. I have a lot of expectations. So I went to an event today at Apple's new New York offices, which I didn't know existed, to look at the new Mac Pro.
Mhm.
Doug Brooks
Yeah.
showed the new Mac Pro. Very interesting. I think there's a lot. I think they're going to be doing some not radical things. Like I said, I think last time we met, I was complaining of the age of the MacBook Pro design. Like I don't think the 16 is on a radical departure from the 15, but it is a very nice piece of hardware.
We were discussing that, I think, just before we came up live. We were kind of talking about that, and for the people watching this later on or right now, we started talking about that because of this comical setup with my iPad, and the keyboard died. But it turns out the 12-inch iPad keyboard has the same pinout, so this works just.
And it's a full-size keyboard.
And it is nicer to type on, but it is just silly. It's a silly setup. Once you have it on a desk, it's really nice. But that's what kicked it off, and we started
What's
talking
funny about
about
those? You have a white iPad, but there's no white keyboard that they sell.
No, you can't do the whole thing in unison.
We're doing iPad shopping over for Christmas to buy somebody an iPad in the family, and we ran into that because we were like, should we get a white iPad? It's like, nope.
Yeah, and so that also talked to us about. We got started talking about chasing the latest and greatest, and like I want to say like I'm off that train, and I want my stuff just to last as long as possible. I want to get something that's really battle tested and just keep using it for years and years and years. That said, I do want to get when Apple revs the next iPad, I do want to get that only because this is 64 gig, and that just kills me. So this will go to my daughter. It's not like getting thrown away or something. Like this will go to my daughter. I'll get the new one and like juice up the storage, which should make it last for years and years and years.
I have to say, I spent most of 2019 using an iPhone, and I just switched back.
Did you go back to Android?
I went back to Android, but being able to get an iPhone with whatever it is, 6 terabytes of storage, I don't know, like they're huge. The storage on it is, and it's fantastic. It's so nice. It's
I
the
agree.
best thing about it.
So when I bought the 10s, which was a similar deal, I gave my old phone to my daughter. I got the 256 model, which was the largest you could get, and it's still great. I only have one weird problem, and yes, everybody yell at me. I need to report this. I have not reported it, but I also haven't griped about it on Twitter. When I do a point update, I get a message that's like, it downloads and it's like, you're out of storage. Do you want me to like put some stuff up in the cloud, whatever they tell you to do, right? Like, do you want me to upload some apps to the cloud? And I'm like, wait, what? I go check my storage and I'm at like 120 gig of 256 gig. I'm like,
Interesting.
I'm like, no. And only recently I've started getting these pop-ups on my phone that says like, iPhone storage almost full. Do you want to turn on iCloud Photo? I'm like, I think it's some warning from iCloud Photo very specifically because my photo libraries are large, but I don't store it in the cloud. So it's just a weird bug. It's like I'm not even close to full.
The first 128.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I'm getting close to 128, but it's not close to full. But yeah, like so with the iPad, we talked about shortcuts and doing more with it. Like I can do so much on the iPad, and there's more I'd like to do. And 64 gig just doesn't cut it when you want to start editing or manipulating video. That's for sure, right? Like that's out right away.
I bought myself a drone, and I've been using it. And it's like it's the first thing that I actually record like videos on. Like I'm not a big video taker, and so the amount of space that I'm using for
Yeah.
stuff just ballooned
Yeah.
instantly because it's like, well, I'm using this video editor and now I got like 5 different versions of this file because
Right.
I'm trying different things. So it's like,
Right.
Right.
yeah,
Your video is basically a stream of high resolution photos.
yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of data.
But did you have anything more on hardware, just aside from like more storage? Like I'm interested in that.
Hardware, I just think that Apple did some interesting things on hardware a couple of years ago,
Mhm.
and they weren't entirely successful. Like in the keyboard,
Well,
like,
yeah.
we can all complain about the butterfly keyboard. It was an audacious move. Like everyone else is just buying switches from the same people, and they're like, we're going to make our own switches, and they're going to be crazy cool, low travel switches. It was not a success.
Yeah. But they tried it.
But they
did
tried it,
something,
and
right?
like seeing them abandon that is actually kind of good. Like it's nice to see Apple abandon
Yes.
things they do
Yeah.
that aren't entirely successful.
It took them too long
It took them too long.
because the feedback was fairly immediate.
Yeah.
And then the of like we just don't like how it feels, and then the feedback of it doesn't last. It like the slightest bit of dust will break your keyboard, and then the way to fix the keyboard is to replace the whole machine, essentially. That feedback came not too long,
Pretty
not too
quickly.
soon after, and it just took them way too long to like, okay, we're gonna do that. Coincidentally, Johnny Ive left the company. I don't know if that has anything to do with anything, but
I was never a big Johnny Ive fanboy.
no, he did a lot of good, but he also,
He did a lot of good.
I think he also had his,
He put certain things first.
yeah.
And I think we can.
He had his like laser focus on thinness, and I'm like, what? No, it's fine. You don't have to just be thinner. There's other criteria that make a successful piece of hardware.
Yeah, whether it was Johnny Ive or whatnot, I mean, like, I do think, trying not to sound like an Apple fanboy, but I do think, like you said, that they take these chances and they have very forward-looking design, and most other companies are still sort of chasing Apple from that perspective. Like, Apple comes out with the AirPods, guess what? Everyone's doing these sort of knockoff AirPod-looking things, or like these giant trackpads that no one really asked for. It turns out they're really nice, and most other laptop manufacturers have increased the size of the trackpad, right?
I mean, we discussed this last time too, though. I think there's a bunch of things that other people are doing in
Yes.
in electro space that Apple is way behind.
Well, one of the other things that we mentioned just before you walked in was, learn Windows and learn other operating systems, particularly Linux and, things that might be a little out of your comfort zone. And speaking of sort of us living in a bubble of, it looks like Apple sort of like has this great market share, whereas if you really look worldwide, Windows still kind of rules the roost, certainly with hospitals and financial companies and things like that. They have the greater market share. And when I went to Duo, and before you start, they send you a form. It's like, hey, what do you want your username to be, and what hardware do you want? I was like, well, I know Macs. I'm like, give me your standard Windows distribution. I could stand to learn a little bit about Windows. They're like, no. When we said, what kind of machine do you want? Do you want a 13-inch or a 15-inch Mac? It's like, oh, well, all right, I'll take the 13-inch Mac. But like that said, I would love to pick up a Surface. I think speaking of nice form factors, I think the Surface, or maybe it's the Surface Go. It's like
The Surface Go is
it's the iPad-ish like one that has that keyboard that looks like it's covered in fuzzy felt.
the Surface is nice.
Yeah, the Surface is really nice.
You mentioned in the beginning of like, you change from wanting to chase the latest thing, and I kind of feel like that way, like the Apple ecosystem is sort of perfect for that because you know what you're getting.
Yeah.
And like if you look at Android or you look at Windows and you look at hardware and software, you really don't know what you're getting because somebody ships their own like app store and somebody like bundles this thing and like.
Well, you know what you're getting on Android if you're buying a Pixel, and that's my recommendation to anyone who's ever saying, they want an Android, or I bought an Android and my experience is really poor. It's like, look, if you're buying Android, get a Pixel. Like, no, there's no straying from that, pretty much. And I think, yeah, Windows is kind of the same unless you're buying a service that's like directly from Microsoft and they control the whole experience.
I would also say, like, there are Macs that if you had bought them, you would feel like you had gotten screwed over. Like, you bought an original MacBook Air,
Well,
or
I
then
guess.
the third generation, whatever, sixth generation MacBook Air, like, both of those.
What was wrong with the 6th generation?
I don't know. It's with there was the original one. Sorry, MacBook, right? So if you bought a first generation MacBook Air, or a first generation MacBook,
The first generation Air was
and not a first
Kind of
generation
miserable.
metal MacBook.
Yeah, the
12-inch MacBook.
a 12-inch Mac. But no, the 12-inch MacBook was pretty good.
It was
The G4 one.
terrible, overheated.
The G4?
No, we're
Oh.
talking about the
recent one.
recent
Oh,
one.
oh.
The reboot.
No.
Yes, the first
thermals.
generation 12-inch
metal.
was
casing.
good,
That
not
was a-
great, and there was a version 2 of it that was pretty good. Anyway,
I mean,
I did forget about that. You're right.
Like, I think there are cases where Apple ships something that's not doesn't feel great.
It
But
happens.
it's rare. It is rare, and there's a whole set of problems you don't have. Like, there's all set of problems you could have with an Android device or a Windows device. Just like, I don't have the right Bluetooth drivers. And my son just got got a used gaming laptop, and
Mm.
chasing down the Bluetooth drivers so he can use his Bluetooth headset. Like, I just want to shoot myself in the foot.
Yeah.
It's so unpleasant. And it's like, I don't have that problem.
You know, but that said, you know, we can also joke around about Windows, but like the backward compatibility and like it is amazing. And you know, this isn't a problem so much for enterprises, but I put together a home Windows machine, and it was just like motherboard from here, graphics card from there, power. So I don't know where I even got half the crap from. It's like, bought a copy of Windows. It's like, oh yeah, I recognize all this. Yeah, you're
Close
up and
enough.
running.
I recognize enough to boot, and then everything else you can get
It
newer versions.
it works, and I'm
Yeah.
playing some games on it. it's
you
it's
really care
working.
about the supply chain of getting those.
I'm playing games on it. I'm not doing critical computing. It's like it's not an issue. But yeah, that's interesting. Like,
Wow counts go for a pretty penny.
what do
Wow counts.
WoW accounts do? That's true. I'm not playing WoW on that, but they do. I haven't looked in a while. Cool. Any other suggestions on a plan for Mac admins? I think I always say become more involved in the community. I think we want to see Mac admins at more conferences and
That's a good one.
at events like this, other local meetups, et cetera, et cetera.
I do think this is the year for MacAdmins and medium enterprise, whatever size businesses, like, to re-examine their directory services. That's a key.
That's an excellent point.
I think there's a big change coming down the pipe in that space, I think.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, I mean, that certainly goes in conjunction with companies moving more and more to the cloud, right? Like, it's, and again, speaking of living in a bubble, I think probably everyone here, myself included, like, work for companies that live in the cloud. And then you go talk to companies that just have not made that shift. And, you know, from my perspective, I end up talking to companies that, you know, you're talking to about sort of like Beyond Corp, Zero Trust for security. And it's just still, like, here we are in 2020, it's just like still a mind-blowing concept to a large number of companies. And part of that is because they're still doing a lot on-prem, which is really bizarre to me. Yeah, I mean, so I think those things combine as well. But yeah, directory services is a huge piece of that. If you're running your own directory, I don't know. I guess there are a lot of companies still running their own Active Directory, and that's their directory service. But
I think in Microsoft's direction is away from that.
oh, 1000%. If you run your own Active Directory and you have not figured out that Microsoft is like moving to Azure AD and moving all this to the cloud, I just saw a presentation from Microsoft on some of that, and I basically think they said, like, I would have to go back and find that slide, and I know it's public, but it was something around like, yeah, LDAP, we're not going to be supporting that as of, it's like, 2021. It's not that far off.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean Active Directory is going to stop working, but certain integrations are going to fall over, right?
The thing I've been hearing is, like, we as Mac administrators talk a lot about what things is Apple only going to allow us to manage through MDM. Like, what I'm hearing from the Windows people is like there's going to be a set of features you can only manage through AS or AD. Like, there's going to be management tooling that's going to work, or through cloud-based AD, whatever. Like, I'm not necessarily paint that product, but like traditional AD is not going to have the hooks to manage some settings in future Windows revisions and things like that. They really want to push people to.
Yeah, I mean, it really obviously depends on your business, but I think for the vast majority of businesses, I don't know why you would be wanting to run this stuff yourself any longer. I can't see hosting my own AD. I can't see hosting my own directory services. I'm just going to use.
Is there anything you should run on-prem? That's fine. At this point.
Probably not, but again, like it depends on your business.
Yeah, unless you have a business, a non-tech. I don't know if there's any technical reasons I can think of off the top of my head, but there should be exceptions. But there's probably business reasons you want to have something like that.
That's good.
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on your business. There are certainly things that you don't. If it's not your core competency, right? Like, there's only so much you want to be maintaining, and that's a good reason to like offload it to the cloud and sort of offload it to someone else. Depends on the sophistication of your tech staff, right? But yeah, I agree. Like, there's just no reason people should be getting paged at weird hours because some single server in their office fell over at 3 a.m. The mail server in the office, stopped working at 3 a.m. on Saturday or something. So yeah, that's a really good point. Like cloud in general, but very specifically directory services. I would really want to be out of the game in dealing with that. Yeah, it's a good point.
I guess my one thing would be something that I've been thinking a lot about in the last 6 months is not using specific tools for inventory and logging, activation, all that. So, like, to expand a little bit on that, like I see a lot of like discussion for like somebody's using a query and they're like, how do I get my data into Splunk? And then Splunk has a custom query language and you can only do specific things with it. And then like and people will spend so much effort on that. And I've been sort of like had this moment where it is that there's a bunch of big data tools that are very generic that allow you to do very cool things. Like, there's BigQuery, and Amazon has a version of it and all that. And it's like you can just put your data in there from all the sources and have a SQL query that gives you exactly what you want and automate all of that without spending so much effort on figuring out which exact puzzle piece fits with which other exact puzzle piece, which is what a lot of the IT security.
Sure. I think, but then the issue is normalizing the data that you're dumping in.
Sure,
there, right? And
it's
that's
a different
complicated.
But
so instead of having like getting your source, instead of having the work to get these 5 sources from 5 different places, now you have to take all of these sources and figure out how to massage them into this one database that you can access. Which I mean is good if you can get it done, but it's also pretty complicated.
Yeah, I mean it's not an easy problem either way. But like the investment, I guess my realization is that investing in that ecosystem is better than investing in the IT one, just because that other one has a much larger audience, and so the end result of like how you display that data, how you do analytics.
Sure, but I think that goes back to like Splunk is an off-the-shelf product that you can throw down a chunk of cache and have it up and running pretty quickly, versus the technical sophistication of your staff to kind of customize that. But yeah, that's an interesting point. If you can sort of make that a little bit more generic, more power to you. Cool. Anything else from the how to be a successful Mac admin in 2020?
So far in the future, like 2020.
I know. It does sound far in the future. We're already halfway through the month-ish, 14th. Yeah. And before I forget to mention, like, most of our companies probably match donations to places. So just putting that out there, please donate to Australia Fires and have your company match it. Our poor friends in Australia. Crazy, crazy, crazy.
When is X-World?
It's usually over like June.
Okay.
Yeah.
June, July, somewhere in that area. So gosh, I hope it's dealt with by then. I mean,
Yeah,
It's
no,
winter by
it is winter, but it's still,
Well, it's actually they've had some rain recently, so
yeah.
it's just the end of the dry season, which has been
How dry. How much rain do you need to put out a huge fire like that, though? It's not like how effective is.
rain helps a lot, and what also really helps is just humidity in the air.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's having grown up out west, a lot of the issue is not necessarily whether you have rain or not, but if the humidity drops really low, then everything just dries out.
Yep.
Even if it's no rain, and that makes it even more likely to get the fire spread. But if the things are more humid, it's not going to burn as fast.
Yeah. So anyway, just a reminder: if your company matches, I mean, donate anyway. But if your company matches, have your company match your donation. But yeah, Xworld. Anyone going to Mac DevOps? Is that the next one, or is MacAdmin?
MacAdmin is usually
MacAdmin
now
is next.
sometime March, maybe. I don't know.
I think they moved it to March.
Yeah. I'm
Anyone
planning to go to Mac DevOps, but I haven't made any already plans, funny tickets yet. Well, I wanted to go for this last couple of years. So.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
It's a good event. I think I've been thinking a bit lately about apprenticeships as much as internships. And like, it got me thinking a little bit about conferences. And I'd love to see, it would be difficult to scale, but I'd love to see conferences sort of make available, like, hey, some people who are interested in this, like, help us get the conference set up. And it would replace like a workshop type thing. But like, hey, I want to learn about Wi-Fi. Great, help us get the conference Wi-Fi set up. And it would be paired with an expert who's like, we're doing this because blah, and we place these things here because blah, and we can monitor it with this tool, right? And like, maybe there's some other infrastructure for the conference you can help get set up. And I don't know how that would work, but it got me thinking about like sort of like traditional internships and like working with a master. Whereas I think internships, you're hiring people who have some sort of baseline and you expect them to be sort of smart, and they come in and you say, well, here's your project, and if you need help, ask me. But at the end of the quarter, we kind of expect you to be X% of the way through this project. Whereas an internship, you'd be sitting with a master, right? You'd be sitting with someone who is doing this thing and they're a master, and you kind of get to watch them every day and see how they work. I don't know how that scales or works, but it's something I've been thinking that would be kind of nice. Like, I don't know if there's a pipeline problem for developers or SREs or sysadmins, that type of thing, but in the InfoSec community, there's definitely a pipeline problem.
I think MacAdmin in general, as a field, like, there's so many people who look like Slack. It's so big.
It is.
When I try to filter out on like expertise, it gets narrow very quickly, and I think there's not a good, especially with like what's happened in the last 5 years or so, where big companies have hired everybody who was doing a lot of open source.
Yeah, I mean,
that kind of goes through waves, doesn't it? Though.
Probably, yeah.
And yes, big companies can scoop people up, but like, I think we're sitting here, like, very luckily, at a company that still supports some of that.
Mhm.
Like, I think people are still doing pretty good work and allowed to release tools as open source. I think the only one of the clear roads to being cut off from that is going to work for Apple, right? And like, fine, that's their thing, right? Like, we've lost a few people to the Apple machine, and they can no longer directly contribute to the Mac community through open source or being like really explicit on Slack or whatever. But
Yes, I'm just reflecting on my own career, and like, if I look back, like the community that I hang out with, like go to conferences and all that, and I think of them like 5-7 years ago, everybody was in some small business, consultancy, education, higher ed, and whatever, and the same people now are all spread around 5 different companies in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Which is nice. Like everybody kind of graduated.
Well, I
But-
know maybe a bubble issue.
Yeah.
not so much a bubble, but I think it goes in waves.
It's a cohort issue.
It's a cohort issue because I
people
think
your age are at that point in their careers.
exactly. I was going to say, like, I think, like, we've been around long enough, like, having seen that. Like, I think just before you joined Google, and probably just before I joined, I felt the same way. Like, Josh Weisenbaker was sort of out in the wild, and Joel Rennick was out in the wild, and Nigel was out in the wild. Right? There were all these people, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, Nigel went to Google, and like Clay's at Google, and like I could stop consulting and went to Google. Josh Weisenbaker went to Apple, right? Like, people just kind of got scooped up, and it was like, oh wow. And then, you know, this new class of people rises up, and they're like, yeah, we're going to fill the gaps. It's all good, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it just might be a cyclical thing, right? But I mean, through all that, like, people keep putting out good tools, and there's good information out there. And, you know, going to work for SAP hasn't stopped, like, Rich Troughton from like blogging and sort of being the unofficial documentarian for the Mac sysadmin world.
That brings up a good reminder, which is like one of my goals for this year is to read the book that Charles and Rich.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. They did just come out with that book, which, yeah, I would like to read that as well. So there's another 2020 plan. Read Charles and Rich Troughton's book, which I'm trying to remember the exact name of, so I don't get it wrong.
I think it's like Apple Device Management or something.
It is, but it had some oddball title that I couldn't remember exactly. Should just go on Amazon. And how many? Oh, I don't have an internet connection. Sorry if anyone's been typing into Slack, because I haven't been seeing it.
The unified theory of managing Macs, iPads, iPhones, and Apple TVs.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that was a unified theory. So that was a slightly oddball title, but it's fun.
It goes with the MDM, which is like, I think that's Apple's trying to do, is present the unified interface for all of these things. Leaves you to figure out the edge cases.
There are always edge cases. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I didn't see this. Going sort of back in Slack, Ryan Manley mentioned he's using the API for their ticketing system in shortcuts. So he gets to say, like, open ticket 47326, and it takes him right to it. So that's a good use too. Cool. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, there are, you know, speaking of that beyond core concept and whatnot, that does make certain things more difficult. Like, for me, there are certain things I want to get to. Even if it's like one of our other cloud services, it's like, oh, well, it has to go through the proxy. We're getting there. We're setting up more APIs and services to deal with that, but it's a road. It's a road. Cool. So we said MacAduck, Mac DevOps. Penn State, I just got an email. They put out their call for speakers, call for papers. It's a good conference. It's a good conference. It has a different vibe. It's big. It's a lot going on. The talks are long. 75-minute talks.
And did I see Mac deploys not happening?
Yes, I should check in with Anthony about that. I don't know why, but Mac Deploy is not happening this year, which usually happens the week prior to
Yeah.
Mac DevOps.
Yeah, I wonder if it's. No, I don't know. Maybe it's. I'm not sure. I have to check. But my initial, when I first thought it was maybe since I'm talking of EP and provisioning and stuff, like maybe it's more of like, well, I don't see a point to the conference, but there's still a lot. So that I don't know. Anyway, it'd be interesting.
Yeah. So, and then all the other ones later in the year, but they're too far away to worry about at the moment. Closing thoughts?
Have
think
some homework to
2020
think about maybe a topic for next time.
I think 2020 is the year of Linux on the desktop.
Yes, or at least Mac on the desktop. Maybe iOS on the desktop. Who knows? Homework.
Yeah, so Apple has been chatting to us in the past year or 2 years about the fact that they're embracing enterprise. And we're gonna want to reflect on that and see like, are they actually like
Is it
have
sort
we-
of the Voldemort embrace? Like,
yeah, have we seen like is our life better or do we feel more heard from Apple?
That's a good question.
It's an escape key on the 16-inch MacBook Pro. Honestly, like that to me, that's the biggest change.
Yeah.
Like that was clearly feedback from. Like, like I went to this event today, which was the Mac Pro show off for enterprise, and it was a room full of people who manage, video editing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's
Like, it wasn't. So which is fine. Like those are good people, but like the thing that they've done most that shows that they don't think of enterprise as a place for some creatives work is the escape key coming back to the 16-inch MacBook Pro.
yeah, agreed. Well, anyway, that's good homework.
But it's a very good question. I agree with it.
That's good. Okay, everybody. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next month. Computer.